Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Musician's Mentor Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mark, and today we're talking to one of my all-time favorite producers, actually. His name is Tatsch. He's a mixing engineer, musician, producer based out of Texas. He's the guitarist and singer for a band called Shadows of Jets, which I've linked in the show notes. He also plays for Cut Throat Finches, and as a producer, he has worked with and collaborated with artists such as Jetta and the Ghost Tree, which you may not have heard of, but you should check out their record. It is phenomenal. Flickerstick, Maren Morris, and a host of others. Taylor and I connected, not quite sure, maybe about a year or so back, when he was doing some mixing engineer work for me. And I'm just a fan of the guy. I love his work ethic. I love his attitude. I love the way he perceives and conceives musical ideas, shall we say. So we're going to jump straight into it. But as usual, if you're enjoying these, please do me a favor and give us a rating or a review. It helps us get found a little bit easier. And also, don't forget to give us a follow or a like or a share via social media. It helps us get found, and we really appreciate that. Anyway, enough from me. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Audio Style's very own Taylor Tatsch. Hey, dude.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. How you doing?
Just fine, thanks.
Good. Well, let's hit it, man. Basically, cool. What we're gonna do here, I don't know if you've listened to any of the other episodes. It's pretty new, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna just have an unedited conversation, mostly about music and the music industry and working within the music industry. And I figured it'd be so cool to talk to you because you've obviously got a few different twists and turns within your career. And I've got a couple things noted down, and we'll get to it. But what I've been doing with everybody, as I've mentioned to you prior, is I ask everybody to just do a little bit of a brief introduction as to who you are, so that anybody listening straight off the bat kind of knows who I'm talking to. So Taylor, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a brief intro.
Well, my name is Taylor Tatsch, and I am a recording engineer slash producer slash musician, guitarist slash singer, and so I run a recording studio here in right now I'm in Fredericksburg, Texas, and just trying to make a living and do the best work I possibly can. And
on that note, not to sound biased, but you happen to be one of my favorite producers slash engineers.
Thank you very much.
I first came to know you through the Jetta and the Ghost Tree record many years ago, but obviously you've done a lot of other things, and we'll talk about that. But let's kind of backtrack a little bit. How old were you when you were kind of first bitten by the musical bug? And furthermore, on that sort of topic, at what points in your life did you kind of figure out that this is what you wanted to do as a career?
I guess I kind of figured that out pretty early on. I grew up in a small town down in South Texas, and there weren't a lot of people to play with down there, but I really loved playing the guitar. Kind of my first influences were probably, George Strait, because he was big down in South Texas. And then I quickly got into the Beatles, like everybody does. But I was pretty young. Really liked their early stuff. I think I had the red cassette, compilation that had all the early stuff on it. And, I really was gravitated to harmonies and the cool production things that were going on. So, I was taking guitar lessons, probably by the age of 7 or 8, and, just really, really into music. And when I was in high school, my parents got me or I guess I was in middle school, actually. They got me a 4-track Tascam recorder, those Porta Studio things.
Yeah.
And so I really, really loved it. And, finally I could, start layering things together. And, and I was really gravitated to, to how the Beatles put together recordings and other bands like the Eagles and Led Zeppelin and, a lot of classic rock stuff. And basically I just was trying to figure out how to get ideas down and get them to sound as good as possible. And so, learning about George Martin and learning about how much of a a big presence a producer has, in making records and all that. And so I was just, trying to, produce things on my own. And, I just kind of did that all the way until I got into college and finally started playing with other people. But that was always in the back of my mind that's kind of what I wanted. I really like the creative part of being in the studio, and I really like playing live. But, in the back of my mind, it was always like, well, this is a career that could, sustain me into my 40s,
Yeah.
And, because being a guitarist and a singer, you're kind of, you'll age out of that kind of quickly, unless you've already made it really big. And, I got into college and was in some bands, and we went to a legitimate recording studio with Todd and Toby Pipes from Deep Blue Something. And, and I was just sitting there watching them, what they did. And, we paid them to record us. And I was just thinking, man, what a cool gig. Bands come in and they pay you to record, and you get to be creative, and then they leave, and then you get to do it again with another band, and you have all these opportunities, to make records, and you have all opportunities for success. When you're in a band or you're a singer-songwriter, you bank everything on that one project, and you push it for a number of years, and then you're like, all right, cool, let's break this band up, or I want to go solo or whatever, and then you have to push that, and then before you know it, you're in your 30s, 40s, So I felt like, well, I have an opportunity here to be on a lot of records, to work on a lot of records that possibly could get, popular or have some success or something like that. And I always felt like from the beginning that was a pretty good career to get into. And, really it just came down to enjoying the creative process.
And is that what you actually went to college for? Did you study audio engineering, or did you go for something else?
Well, this was kind of before Full Sail and those types of, specialized recording
schools,
degree schools, those types of things. So I just kind of, when I went to UNT, I went to University of North Texas, and I went to do jazz studies. But, coming from a small town, you're not as good as you think you are. You could be the cool guitar player around the area, or a good guitar. I wouldn't say I was cool. I was definitely not cool. But, you get to UNT and you realize, oh, all these guys are so much better. They've had so much more experience, and I just didn't really feel like I wanted to do jazz anyways. Like if you're not the best jazz guitar player, best jazz guitarist, you're going to be teaching, Yeah. And teaching is a great profession. Both my parents are teachers, but I never really caught the teaching bug. And so I switched from jazz studies to radio, TV, film, because that was the closest thing they had to audio production. You could take some audio production classes. But, in college, I basically just started recording bands out of my house. And one of the first bands that I recorded was called Space Cadet. And they were a Dallas band that was just kind of getting started at the time. And, I recorded them in our house, on some pretty terrible microphones and in a pretty terrible room. But John Kirtland from Deep Blue Something had started up a record label, and he heard the songs that we did, and he wanted to sign them, and he had a friend in LA who owned Trauma Records, and he got them signed to Trauma Records, which was the label that No Doubt and Bush were on.
Yeah.
And so that was a fun little, dipping your toe into the business side, of all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and also really cool. I mean, if you were kind of doing that all out of your house with novice microphones and stuff like that, and you still got the results to get them that kind of conclusion, that's quite something. It's actually, it always makes me quite interested, this particular topic, because, excuse me, I've got a few engineer friends, and I obviously dabble a little bit in that sort of world as well, not as much as you, but...
Well, you're very good at it.
You meet a lot of guys, and I suppose this is no different to musical instruments. There seems to be a little bit of a stigma with gear, and a lot of guys seem to have this: if you're not playing such and such a piece of gear, you're not going to be any good. Or if you don't have this preamp, you're not going to be any good. Or, and I understand that good gear makes good recordings, but I think the perception is slightly falsified by people who believe that that's the only way it works. Because with a decent enough ear and enough attention to detail, I think you can get really good results. I mean, that Billie Eilish album that blew up a couple years ago, that kind of proved that. So I think if anyone doubts that you need, or that you can't get a good result on novice gear, I think they need to relook at that, It's not always the case.
No doubt about it. It's, one of the more depressing and soul-sucking things is to get on those audio forums, where these guys that are, they're cork-sniffing over this preamp and that preamp and these microphones and, and you're like, what the hell have you done? True, you can, and some have done a lot of cool things too, but you're missing the forest for the trees, I think. With gear, I think you need good gear. You need the best gear that you can afford.
Yeah.
But beyond that, especially in this day and age where, I was lucky enough to be a part of some records where there was a producer and an engineer.
Cool.
And you didn't ask the engineer about content. I remember talking to the engineer. I was like, "Was that a good take?" And he's like, "Don't ask me. Ask that guy." And the producer, likewise, didn't touch any of the gear, and he didn't pick the microphones. He didn't, and the very, compartmentalized, roles, like they didn't cross, I guess if the producer was like, oh, that's too bassy or too, whatever, then the engineer would fix it or change it. But, nowadays even all the way to the top, it's pretty much a producer / engineer, doing the same job. And I think that if you go into it, only focusing on the engineering and, spending 3 hours trying to get your kick drum sound, or a whole day, or whatever, you hear those stories about the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, spending days just getting a drum sound. And that's all well and good. Those are fantastic drum sounds. But, in my experience working with bands, you can really kill a vibe by sitting there, tweaking on something, and they've played 5 takes, and you're like, okay, let's start recording now. And they're like, well, we already just gave you our best stuff,
Yeah,
So I try to get that engineering out of the way as quickly as possible. Trust my gear, use the mic techniques and the recording techniques that I know work. Do a few things that are fun and innovative per project. I really do like to try new things and stuff like that. But if you get bogged down in the engineering stuff of it, too much, then you really kill the vibe. And really as long as there's no problem with how you're recording everything, you need to get down to content pretty quickly. You need to put on the producer hat and take off the engineering hat and really get into what's coming through the mics, because that's way more of a that's what's important, really. I mean, we can think all day long about how amazing some of these microphones were back in the 60s and 50s and 70s and all that, but when you think about the how they were being forced to record, they had very limited tracks. They had tape machines that were extremely noisy. They had gear that was extremely noisy, and they had limitations too. And at some point you got to get down to content. And right now, I mean, even your, a $500 microphone is going to have way less noise, than what they would have back in the day. And you're not dealing with the tape machine just adding tons of tape hiss on top of everything. And, with digital, you can it's clear. It's, you're listening back exactly, theoretically exactly how you're recording it. So it takes a lot of the burden off of the engineering side of it. I think you can really get bogged down in the engineering and lose the forest for the trees.
Yeah, I agree, man. And again, I've said in some of these episodes prior, like, I'm a big believer in each to their own, with everything.
Yeah.
But I do believe that, and I think if you're recording a band or even if you're the guy in the studio being recorded, it's like you say, man, once that energy is gone, oh, it sucks, man. And they're trying to get the best performance out you. And what always put me off a lot with studios and I know that it is a thing for a lot of guys, but I remember going to the studio the first time. I must have been like 15, 16, and my band had won this like crazy big battle of the bands in the area that I grew up in. And they spent thousands on putting us in the studio. That was the prize. And we were really excited only to get to the studio. And I'd never actually realized that a lot of the studios had those big digital clocks. And, we knew we only had a certain amount of hours per day, and we're all new and we're kids and we're like trying to do the best thing we can, but like we just see this clock counting down, and it puts so much pressure on us that I can't even listen to that first recording. It's just it's just like I hate it. And I just think that vibe, it's like you say, the vibe, the energy, it's so important, so yeah, man.
It really is.
So let's talk about, I know you're still playing and I know you're still gigging and stuff like that, but I know the engineering thing is more of your thing, but was there a point in your career where perhaps you felt like you had definitely transitioned more from a player to the production side of things? And if so, what would you say to sort of up and coming producer wannabes or home studio producers on trying to just do their thing and believe in themselves enough to maybe give it a go if that's what they're trying to do?
Well, to answer the first part, I think probably after my first Denton band, broke up, we kind of gave it a good go. Like you said, being in the studio and watching the clock and realizing, oh, we're really spending a lot of money on this. We don't have a lot of time. And coming out with a product that, that I didn't really like. And that was no fault of the producers at the time. I mean, we were really green, no doubt about it. But around that time when I left that band, or the band broke up, I was like, okay, well, what really is going to live on are the recordings, you know? And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to really dive into this. And I had a upstairs from Bass Propulsion Labs where Todd and Toby from Deep Blue had their studio. I rented out 2 rooms, and they're basically office rooms, but one had a really tall ceiling and one had a curved wall, and so it was like, okay, well, these are fun recording spaces. And I decided, all right, well, I'm just going to rent these 2 rooms out. I'm going to really work on my craft here. And I even recorded a whole record again with Todd and Toby that I never released because I was still learning, like, what is it that, like, how am I'm not expressing myself in the right way. I'm not, when I want something to change engineering wise, I don't know how to express that. I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I really just dug in and tried to learn, like, how do you get a good drum sound? How do you record a drum set the right way? And I guess there's no real right way, but there are definitely some wrong ways. And so how do I avoid the wrong ways? How do I record guitars? How do I record acoustic guitars? And eventually I was just like, okay, finally I can start doing this by myself, for myself. And of course I was recording other bands at the time and recording solo artists, and, God bless them, they let me learn while I was doing that. But I mean, to an engineer that wants to jump into it, I mean, you just got to have the confidence, and and I would say the real thing is relationships. I wouldn't say it's a real thing. That is a big thing, because you can do the engineering and the producing thing, but if you can't have the relationship with the band or the artist and make them feel comfortable, then you're, again, not going to get good things out of them.
Yeah.
And so you need that. You need to learn how, and sometimes it's learning what not to do. Watching other producers, like what he said right there, put that guy in a terrible position.
Mm-hmm.
Like making this stupid joke made that singer very self-conscious,
Yeah.
or telling the guitar player, yeah, is that what you're going to play? And the guitar player's not going to give you anything after that. You got to be positive, and you got to assert yourself when necessary. And it's still a learning process, because I'm always trying to figure out what that line is, because I really want to represent what the band and the artist is doing, and how they want to express themselves. And then sometimes I hear things that are just not going to fly, and I have to speak up like, hey, we got to do this a different way, or I have an idea that I think will really help everything to add. And you got to be able to navigate how to say these things and how to do these things, because you can shut a band or an artist off really quick by doing things in the wrong way.
Yeah.
So, it's just a constant learning process. I've been doing it for 20 plus years, and every band, at the end of the session, I'm like, did I do that right? Did I say, what did I say? Did I say the right things to get the right results, and it's funny too, because you watch some, you'll listen to some band say, oh, this producer was so headstrong and he wanted things his way, and we didn't like that, and that's why we're not working with him.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, I don't want to do that. And then sometimes a band will be like, yeah, we went in and this guy just had a vision and it turned out amazing, and we just did everything he told us to do and turned out amazing. I'm like, okay, well, how do I reconcile these two things? Because I don't want to be Hitler in the recording session, but at the same time, you can't be passive too, and really what it comes down to is I keep thinking about George Martin and how he was that fifth Beatle,
without a doubt.
He was just
without a doubt.
How he just really, he saw the talent in the band, and he just put his little things in that he wanted to do, and he had really good engineers to record them in a unique way and everything like that. So I guess to someone who's wanting to make that jump, from being a producer into, being a singer or guitar player, or instrumentalist into being an engineer, it's multifaceted. You got to learn how to use your gear, and you got to learn how to get along with the band and have a good rapport.
Yeah, and so again, here's a topic that seems to be coming up just constantly. And I'm not just talking to engineers. I've had a few drummers on already. I've had a few guitarists, a couple producers, a bass player. And the common theme here is always, connections, relationships, personalities. And I suppose the difference with say, one guy trying to play in a band with maybe 3 or 4 other guys, or however large the band is, as a producer, you're trying to deal with, you might be recording an 8-piece band today, and you've got to learn those different personalities, and then you might be on a 3-piece tomorrow that have complete different personalities. So you've got to find this different balance. And it's funny that you brought up some of those jokes, because I've been in studios again where you get close with some of the guys, but some of the jokes that get made definitely rub certain people the wrong way, or maybe a player's not as confident as they appear, and something as silly as are you really going to play that part makes the guy think that he or she is terrible, and before you know it, you don't get that recording finished, or he or she doesn't want to play on the rest of the album, and it's like, what? It's crazy.
They leave the fucking band.
I've had it happen.
They leave the band.
I know you can swear on this. It's totally cool.
It's
just funny, because it's like, musicians are sensitive creatures. That's been proven time and time again, and there are always exceptions to every rule, but for the most part, even the most confident musician has some kind of insecurity, and there's usually someone who can find it. And when they do, oh man, it's a slippery slope, and it's never a good thing. You know?
Yeah, there's some producers that rely on that. I mean, they like conflict. They think, oh, these particular records were made under duress, and this is how you get like a fiery recording and all that. And I'm just like, oh my God, you know. In my experience, if I piss off a band, they're probably not going to want to work with me again, or they fucking may break up,
Yeah, and how terrible to know that you might have been the guy that broke that band up. Oh, that sucks, man.
I know. No, every band member, I mean, and another misconception is that like young band members think that, oh, these, top players, they got egos. They're that is so wrong. Like completely. It's completely the opposite. It's the inexperienced players, the players that have a chip on their shoulder that know they're not very good, but they overcompensate by doing things that are way out of their wheelhouse, or they want to be the loudest in the mix, or they're like, no, that's my snare sound, don't mess with my snare sound, or whatever, or no, why are you making me play this guitar? That's not my guitar, They're those are the guys with the egos. I guarantee you, as I've gotten better and better at what I'm doing, and had the chance to record better and better musicians, the better musicians have zero ego. Yeah, they're like, hey man, I want you to make this better. You know, like make me sound better. If you want me to play that Strat, I'll play the Strat. Completely. Hey, my amp's good, but man, if you want me to do this on a Vox, let's do it on a Vox. And same thing with drummers. They're like, man, whatever snare sound we're going for, I want you to help me with that. And and I think so much conflict arises from insecurity, and I think that's something that, inexperienced musicians and inexperienced engineers and producers, need to be aware of that and realize when they're being egotistical, and realize that we are all on the same team. We're all trying to make the best product possible, and we all want to make some money at the end of the day. So, let's be on the same team. Exactly.
It's for the song, and that's going back to the Beatles. That's what made them so great. It's like, okay, I mean, I know that there's lots of stories about the Beatles out there, and I'm sure you probably watched the Get Back series that came out. And like, there's different opinions on certain behaviors in that sort of documentary, obviously. But the bottom line is, man, the songs. You take the Beatles' worst song, and it's still, in my opinion, a masterpiece. I love that band.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see how George Harrison, he was being marginalized, in the Beatles, and not really given the time of day. And obviously, you have two really headstrong and super talented songwriters already in the band. Yeah. But and it's funny, in that documentary, you saw George leave the band, but he walked back in, and he swallowed his pride. And not only he finished that record, when they did Abbey Road, I mean, he saved that record. Oh, completely. His songs are absolutely amazing. And that Abbey Road wouldn't have been what it is without George Harrison's contributions. Oh, totally. And if he was just a fiery asshole, pissed everybody off, the record wouldn't have gotten done. Probably the Get Back or Let It Be album wouldn't have gotten done in the same way too. So, but he had that maturity to be like, okay, well, I'm here to serve a purpose. I can also have my solo project later or whatever, but I'm part of this group, and we're focused on a goal. And we'll get to the finish line if we all just play ball, You
know what else I loved about that documentary, especially being a drummer, is, you often hear these comments. Again, I usually think it's more of an insecurity thing than anything else, but I've heard so much negativity towards Ringo Starr during my life. Like people don't think Ringo's a good drummer. Which I completely disagree with. But that documentary, for any drummer listening, you can learn so much from Ringo, because he basically just stays out of the drama the whole time. He shows up on time, he leaves at the end of the day, doesn't get involved. It's like, what a good lesson for a musician to learn,
Yeah, and just playing some badass stuff all the time.
He's
iconic drum parts.
Killer.
Yeah, just killing it.
Yeah.
And he may not be, Vinny Colaiuta or whatever technically and all that stuff, but he's everything they need, and he's more than they need. He's making iconic parts to all these songs.
Yeah.
And without being super flashy.
Yeah.
That's just I know they only lasted for like 8 years, but I mean, when they were together, that was and with a producer in there, I mean, it's just such a machine of like, this is just a crossroads of creativity and work. I mean, again, and it wasn't like, oh, well, we'll go into the studio for, 3 months and, we'll F around for most of that. It's like they showed up at 10 o'clock. It's like their job. They showed up like and and they got down to work and they just made great stuff. And I know they had their personal things, but one thing that you can see just by that documentary is that when they're there all together, they're focused on what they're doing. And yeah, there's so many that's one of the things that I really like about having a location studio like I do kind of out in the country. Is that I think if I were in town and there's all these distractions of girlfriends and boyfriends and, oh, we got to get to the club and we're playing tonight and all that stuff. And it's just like, I really enjoy being out of all that, and the band is staying here and everyone's just focused on what we're doing,
Yeah, that's super
I like
cool.
without having any of those distractions.
So let's use that as a little bit of a segue. We were talking about how they sort of showed up on time and treated it like a job.
Mm-hmm.
What do you, or maybe what tips, let's use that phrase instead, what tips would you give people on how to stay motivated as a musician or a producer, especially when you are essentially self-employed? You're not having to go somewhere 9 to 5 every day and get your salary at the end of each month. You have to potentially hustle and do a few different things to make your salary. Mm-hmm. What do you do to stay motivated?
Well, I guess from a producer-engineer standpoint, if you find that you're not working as much as you want, then go out and see some bands. Go out and meet singer-songwriters. Go and research, okay, who's playing tonight and who, because I found if you just message them or email them, that's not quite the same as, being there, and having that face-to-face relationship. Because there's nothing like a band gets off stage and you introduce yourself like, man, that was really great. Let's have a discussion on, recording, who are y'all recording with? I love those new songs that you said you had that y'all are working on. And, it's not really like stoking the ego, but but to let them know that you are into their band. And, the same thing with the singer-songwriter, like I really see something that, that I really like, and I would love to work with you. This is a situation I have going on over here. I think that we can make some really great stuff, if, and just having those conversations like that is a lot better than like, cold calling bands and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I guess just having your longevity is a, you do get frustrated from time to time, but focusing on the positive things that are, and not focusing on anybody else. Like, cause if I focused on what other producers are doing around town, or in the state or whatever, or how young somebody is when they get, they do a big record, that's nothing but negative, emotions that come up from that. It's not going to do anything positive for me. I have to think about, like, what have I done? Where was I 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And how can I get better at what I'm doing? Because the minute you get jealous and like, oh, he doesn't deserve it. Well, do I deserve it? Are my skills good enough? What can I learn? How can I better myself? I think guitar players and singers, same thing. I mean, so many singers think they're the shit, and it's like, you're not focusing on singing. Like you could really work on your craft. If that's your one craft, work on singing. Guitar player, same thing. It's like, you don't have to like practice scales 5 times a day, but don't just play once play on Friday night and then get drunk for 6 days out of the week and then come back and play on Friday nights. Like, what can you do to make yourself better? I mean, can you wake up every day and try to write a song or a riff or whatever? And, like, just work at it, I think. And I think if you put in the work, the cream will rise to the top. I mean, you may not be like Rick Rubin famous, or Led Zeppelin famous, and one thing I kind of have learned from this world is that if you put your work in, you're going to have success, at some level,
Yeah.
So, because, talent will only get you so far. Sometimes people just have crazy talent and they don't have to work at it. And sometimes people have a really great work ethic, and that makes up for the talent, that maybe they need to work on a little bit, So you just have to keep working. You can't nothing's going to be handed to you. You just have to keep doing it.
I agree. And, something I've noticed from my side is I've known some of those really natural guys in my life,
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because, and I'm stereotyping, but sometimes what I've noticed is because they're so naturally gifted, they don't put the work in. And the person who does seem to put the work in on the other side that maybe isn't nearly as naturally gifted, they seem to almost surpass that person in a period of time. I'm not talking about a day, but if it's almost like, you see those old school scales where like you can put something on either side, and it's almost like you see the side where the guy who was naturally gifted starts to kind of come down a little, and the person who was like kind of coming through the back door starts to slightly come up, and it's quite amazing to see. It's like, and I get it, especially as a younger musician, it's so easy to get frustrated with those kinds of things, but you're totally on the money, because the more time you're spending focusing on somebody else, you're neglecting your own self-improvement. So it's like you might as well just forget about that. And if it really bugs you, figure out what they're doing that you like and start practicing that, because, like you're not going to benefit anything. It's like you said, it just becomes this negative freaking snowball effect,
Yeah. And it's going to portray you're going to portray yourself like that to others.
Oh, completely.
And there isn't anybody out there that wants to work with somebody who is negative or vindictive or anything like that. And so that can really, hinder your opportunities. One good example of a confluence of talent and hard work would be Maren Morris.
Oh yeah.
I started playing. Yeah, I started playing with her. Probably when she was about 14 or 15, something like that. And the first time the drummer, Cooper Heffley, who's a fantastic drummer living in Nashville right now, but he was probably 17 at the time, and I knew him through a different band, and he called me up and said, "Hey, we need a guitar player for this band, but you really have to hear her sing." And I came and saw a gig and was blown away by her voice. And I was thinking, man, she's really, really got something. She'll be a star at some point.
Yeah.
And so I started working with her, and I was working. I had a studio by myself, and I was also working at Bass Propulsion Labs at the time. And so her parents, allowed me to record her, which was great, because I got to hone my producing skills with somebody who was really good at singing. Yeah. But the thing with Maren is that she never was like, well, I'm so good and everyone needs to hand it to me. I mean, she was writing constantly and she was singing badass shows all the time. Like the only time I ever heard her sing a bad show was when she was like sick as a dog, like she was really sick. And so, I mean, it's just that consistency, knowing her craft and continuing to get better. And at the time, Casey Musgraves was coming up, Miranda Lambert was coming up, and they all came up a couple years before Maren did.
Yeah.
And I never heard her be like, I hate these girls. What do they have that I don't have?
Jealous.
Instead, she was listening to their records. She was following their careers and what they were doing. And, when we played a show in France, at the Equa Blues Festival, which is basically a Texas country music festival in France, which is really weird. But then she got to really hang out with Casey, and it wasn't like this catty thing. I mean, they were in the back with their phones, like texting and all this stuff.
That's cool.
Like, there's no room for that petty competition and jealousy and stuff like that. And now Maren is, clearly in that group, with all these people, selling millions of records and working with all the people that she always wanted to work with.
Yeah.
She could have easily gotten jealous or not worked on her craft or, not written songs, just depended on somebody else to write songs. But, instead she's an amazing singer. She's a great songwriter. And her arrows just pointed up,
Oh, yeah, dude.
People need to understand those types of things. It's like no one's going to hand it to you, even if you're really good. If you're best around town, try to be the best in the state.
Yeah.
Try to, continue to get better.
I agree. So when she blew up, because, she's obviously one of the biggest female country stars in the world right now. Did you find that working on, because you did her first album? I
did 2 records with her.
Two records.
I did and she ended up moving to Nashville. She was getting a little it was just a natural progression,
of
really.
Course, yeah.
But the Texas country music scene isn't the best, for girls. You look at the festival lineups and it's all like there's 25 guys and down at the bottom they got one girl.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so it was one of those things where the opportunity for her was at the time being a songwriter, and she, we talked about it at the studio one day. She came over to do some demos and she was like, I either want to like go to LA and try to be an actress, or I want to, go to New York and do something up there. And I was like, well, you're a great songwriter.
Yeah.
You should just go, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but Nashville needs songwriters, and you've already got your own career and you know how to sing. So if you get some writing credits and get that like baseline credibility to where you're not just some, the fresh face in Nashville, but you are writing songs, and then someone's going to turn to you and be like, it's your turn, because you've got the whole package already. You've got those things that they want,
Yeah.
And that really kind of ended up happening that way. I know there were a lot of other pieces that fell into place with, lawyers and, just it doesn't take me just suggesting it. It takes a lot of other things. But yeah, she got a co-write on a Tim McGraw record and a Kelly Clarkson record, and before you knew it, she was signed and winning Grammys.
Yeah.
So
So side note, and it's not actually part of our conversation, but I'll leave it in here. Did you perhaps ever get to meet or know that guy that she would work with, Busby? I think
I never did.
His name was Busby, because he was quite a good producer in his own rights.
He was. And I know that she really loved working with him from the quotes that I've seen and the times that I've spoken to her. It was a tragic thing. He died of cancer pretty quickly after.
It was like no one even knew it was coming, and he was young as well, man. Shame. Poor guy.
Yeah.
So
I'm
sorry. Carry on.
No, I was going to say I was just so happy with her, or happy for her through the whole thing. I knew that I couldn't move to Nashville at the same time that she did. And that wasn't really part of the deal anyway, I was still up and coming, and she deserves to work with the best.
Yeah.
She deserves to be with the best producers that a record label can afford to put with her, and and obviously that's what's happening. So,
well, again, it goes back to what we were just talking about. You could have a complete different attitude to that. You could be bitter and be like, oh, I was playing for her and I produced the record and blah blah blah. But instead, you're positive about it and you're happy for her, and it's a whole different vibe. That's what it needs to be, man. We need to build each other up more as musicians instead of be tearing each other down. And I know that people think that all the musicians are buddies and stuff, but even like in sort of current times, I still see guys doing some shady stuff and saying things, and you just go like, man, I don't really want to be part of this conversation. And sometimes it's so awkward because you'll be hanging out backstage somewhere and things might be said, when a person's not around, and you're kind of in that group and you're like, oh man, this is just awkward. Like, you know,
Oh yeah.
just no place for it. And hopefully one day it'll fade. But given that ego is such a big part of the music industry, it probably won't.
Probably not. I mean, it's just such a strange thing, this kind of business, because you're dealing with artists who, by definition, I think tend to be more emotional and not, you know, they don't exercise the rational side of their brain as much, and so then you have a lot of, you know, alcohol, you know, is part of the whole thing too. So people say things that they don't necessarily need to say, including myself from time to time. But and you lump that in with the fact that it's a competition. A lot of the times, you know, it feels like a competition. You know, I got to be the biggest here, I got to be the biggest there, the best. And it can turn catty and shallow really quickly. But yeah, I could be bitter about the Maren thing, but that does nobody any good. It doesn't do any good for her career. It doesn't do any good for my career. And I don't really have anything to be bitter about, because, you know, she allowed me and her family allowed me to make 2 records with her. Yeah. And, you know, that really helped my career out. And, you know, I think, and we're always going to be friends. The thing is, if I were bitter about it, you know, then I burn a bridge.
Of course.
And Maren's the sweetest girl in the world. Why would I burn that bridge? Yeah. You know, she's never done me wrong. So, yeah.
Yeah, and plus having her blow up to the extent that she did, you know, anybody who then discovers her, if they're anything like I am, you go back and look at anything that's been recorded prior, and you buy those albums and you listen to those albums and you see the progression and you go, oh wow, I really love this song from album number whatever. So it's like, it's all good stuff, man.
Yeah, I mean, if there was one thing to kind of be irked about, is that it is sort of the record label thing to shelve or to pull those previous records. You know, they want to make sure that it's a fresh new artist, you know, and they don't want those waters to be sullied by anything that was happening before and all that stuff. So really what's out there on YouTube, you know, that includes me, is kind of live performances and some in-studio performances. But those 2 records were pulled, and I think you can probably get them on eBay or something like that.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's not a big deal. You know, that's just the way it goes. That happens with any band. You know, any band that gets signed to a major, they want that to be like the debut album. You know, and the previous records that they did locally are just basically demos and stuff. So, you know, that's just the way it goes. And again, you know, I could be bitter, but you know, if I were, then that completely destroys any opportunity that may come from, you know, my friendship with Maren, which is still intact.
Exactly.
You know,
and you know, it's always so funny, again, that particular topic, because, you know, 9 times out of 10, the label wants you to look like this brand new discovery, but they also won't look at you unless you have all these numbers and a proven track record. So it's like, it's such a catch-22. Bands have to do all this work. Then they get the label comes about, goes, okay, we're going to change everything about you. And you're basically starting from scratch. So all the years of work was almost pointless, but that's just how it is, you know, unless you go viral on TikTok.
And so many bands break up in that situation too. You know, that all of a sudden they got a record label telling them what kind of record they need to make, and that causes friction within the band. So this band has a upwards trajectory and has all these fans and all that stuff, and then they're making their debut record, and the record label wants it to be something that's not what they sound like at all.
Yeah, completely.
And the singer's like, you know, well, this is my one ticket, and the guitar player's like, well, I'm getting pushed out, and the drummer's like, they want to replace me, and you know, and then all of a sudden the band's gone, you know, and you know, it's just a shame, because the artistic people are the artistic people, and the people that run the record labels usually are not the artistic people, and they're very rational, or the bean counters, you know, whatever, and they're not concerned about the art as much as the business side. And those 2 worlds don't really, you know, interact well, you know, as you can see throughout history. And you know, and I'm kind of right in the middle, where I have to be artistic sometimes, and I have to be rational sometimes. Like, we can't have a 6-minute song, guys. It can't take us 2.5 minutes to get to the chorus if this is your best song.
Yeah.
And they need that sometimes. Be like, okay, well, you're right. We shouldn't start the song off with a bass solo. Oh, okay.
What if we shorten the 4-minute bass solo to a 3-minute bass solo?
Yeah. Why don't we take the screamy rap part out, since this is a ballad,
Beautiful. So Taylor, what do you typically do when you're not doing music? And I know that you're doing music all the time because, you're a self-employed guy. So obviously you take what you can get when you can get it. But do you do anything away from music? What do you do for sort of downtime, or do you spend any time doing anything enjoyable for music rather than, and I'm not saying it's not enjoyable, but rather than working with music?
Well, I still have my own band called Shadows of Jets, and so that's kind of my outlet to write and to go play shows, where I'm kind of just exercising the pure artistic part of me and not like, having to deal with a whole, band. I do have a band, but it's all like professional guys that kind of understand that, like, we're playing the songs, and it's, no one really gets too crazy.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have 2 boys and a wife, and so I spend a lot of time with them. I love to, to run and to bike. I try to do something physical every day, to kind of keep my stress levels down. But I mean, basically, music is my life. If I'm not recording a band, then I'm trying to figure out, what needs to happen for my band. I also play in a band called the Cut Throat Finches from Fort Worth, and which is a different thing because I'm not the principal songwriter in that band. I'm just a sideman. I play guitar. But they also let me be creative, which is great. And so I get that live playing itch scratched. Through that. But yeah, I mean, music has always been my life. I feel like if someone said you couldn't do music anymore, I really don't know what I would do. That terrifies me more than anything else. So I just have to keep making it my life, and and then I'll be happy, hopefully.
Yeah. And let's kind of shift gears off of that slightly as well. So you spoke about your 2 boys and your wife, and I don't mean to get too personal here, but
yeah.
How do you find the balance between family and work?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, she is a homebody. She goes to bed early and gets up early. She's a teacher at the school that my boys go to. And it sucks because I work on the nights and the weekends primarily. The normal waking hours is not when bands like to work,
Yeah.
So I do have to carve out those times. I have to make sure to give 2 or 3 days out of the week to the family, and I have to make sure to give weekends here and there to the family. And Randy, who's my wife, she demands it, and rightly so.
Yeah.
If I don't give her time, she lets me know about it, and really that's so important to me to have my boys and my wife, as a grounding part of my being, and I can't neglect that.
Of course,
I do. I'm sure she feels like I do all the time, but she also understands that the type of work that I'm in is different, than what most people do.
Yeah.
And she knew that from the moment she met me. I met her when I was 19, and so we've been together. We were on and off initially, but we've been married for 15 years, I think, 16. Wow. So it's
congratulations.
It's a balance,
that's a big achievement, especially. I mean, not even just for musicians nowadays, for anybody. But I mean, add the music lifestyle to it, and that's a whole different ball game. So that's an accolade, man. Good for you.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, being on tour is the hardest thing, I think, for a relationship. And and I haven't been on tour. I did some touring back in the mid-aughts with Ryan Cabrera, and that was a lot of fun because I got to play a lot of fun places. But man, that life is tough. It's a lot of fun, but right now, if I were to tour, to go out for a month or 2 months or longer, I mean, the money would just have to be, the money would have to be there. Yeah, because it is a hard life, So.
Well, I like this new formula that a lot of the rock bands seem to be implementing, that almost that Nashville country sort of touring system, whereby they'll kind of tour Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe a Monday night, come back, be home Tuesday, Wednesday, go back out, which, man, that beats the whole, like you say, being gone for 2-3 months at a time thing. Because, like, how are you expected to last between vices and temptations and just not being there? It's tough, man. It's really tough.
Yeah, I mean, but when you're a brand new artist, I mean, I saw this with Cabrera. I mean, when you're a brand new artist, I mean, they put you in the machine and you need to be on board.
Yeah.
They've got, okay, we're doing this release at this time. You're going on tour. You're opening for these people for these 4 weeks. And the minute you get off of that, you're going to be doing this other tour. And there's not really a consideration for home life or anything like that. I mean, it's really kind of set up it's a young man's game, really.
Yeah.
And I thought about that too with Maren. I was like, well, it'd be cool if she asked me to play guitar on tour. And the only thing, like, it would be cool to be asked, and it would be cool to play the shows. But at this time in my life, be like, man, that's a young man's game, you know? You got to have guys that are 25 or unmarried or whatever that can just go and go and go, and they don't mind being away from home or not having an apartment, not having kids, not having a dog, those types of things, because that just doesn't work. Like I said, it's got to be the right situation nowadays. But that's why I do the producing and engineering. I'm much happier doing that kind of stuff. Yeah,
totally cool. Well, so listen, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I'm going to honor our time, but I just want to ask you 2 more questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
Question 1, back to the sort of audio world here. Obviously, we're living in a time where anybody with a decent enough computer and a bit of a microphone and an interface can record. Not necessarily always to the best quality, but they can do it if they use their imaginations. So just give a little tip to DIY musicians who are recording for themselves and they want to send files to somebody like yourself. What's the best way for them to capture audio? Now, obviously, this is a loaded question because we're not going to talk about a particular instrument, but just so they have an idea of straight out the bat, knowing that they can do a certain thing better for guys like yourself, what could they do?
Well, I mean, just making better recordings always helps. For instance, with like drums, making sure drums are nice and in phase, that you're taking the care to make sure things are taking care to make sure that things are not peaking, all over the place. They're not distorting. Being, sometimes you get just loads and loads and loads of tracks and they're like, well, sort it out for me. Like, being a little bit more direct on what you want to play, because if you have like 5 rhythm tracks and they're all sort of doing different things, it's hard to make that a good mix.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, just attention to detail, making sure things aren't peaking, making sure things are in phase, making sure that you don't have extraneous noise just going all over especially something that's supposed to be quiet, assuming that I can just take noise out, like you can sort of sometimes, but, getting the cleanest possible recordings, possible, just clean it up. Basically, that's the one big thing that I learned as I was coming up. Is just once you know how to get clean recordings, then you can start committing to interesting, like, I'm going to compress this in a really weird way and all that stuff. But you got to make sure that you can't start off with being crazy, because it always comes back to like, well, it just, everything's kind of distorted now. It needs to be clearer. And you're like, okay, well, I got a bunch of distorted tracks, or like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. It wasn't recorded at all like you're saying that you want it to be recorded. Just being intentional, being intentional with how you're recording things, making sure things that are well played and in time and in tune, because you can't engineer your way out of something out of tune, or you can't engineer your way out of a bad performance.
Of course.
I mean, with drums, you sort of can. You can move things and start adding samples in and all that and make things sound way better. But guitars, with electric distorted guitars, you're kind of just stuck with what you got, so play it right. Same thing with bass. If you're clacking away on the bass and you all of a sudden want this pristine bass sound, it's like, okay, well, that ain't going to happen. We're going to have a new bass, or we're going to do something else. Just a nice practical approach to it always helps. Good, clean recordings. I hate to sound like an old fart, because that's the thing that I read in books, when I was growing up about old producers, not old producers, but,
I know
whether it was, a Kramer or Ciccarelli or, any of these guys are like, you need, like, make sure you can get a good, clean recording, make sure it sounds clean and nice, and then you can mess things up.
Yeah, completely.
And then again, you can commit to crazy sounds too if you want to, but you can't rely on that.
Yeah, as long as like you say, as long as there's a little bit of attention to detail. They can't expect
detail.
You can't expect a producer of any kind to polish a turd.
Yeah. Well, one funny thing is, like, there's another studio that the owner came to me one time, and they're known for like garagey rock kind of stuff, and they have their own label and all that. It's very garagey and indie and all that stuff. And I didn't know whether he was taking the piss or what, but he was like, "Dude, your recordings are always so clean. How do you get them to be clean? How do you get that?" And I'm like, I don't know. That's something that I've been working on for years and years, and that's the thing. Like, bands would come to me after working with them and be like, "We're tired of sounding like a garage band."
Yeah.
Like we actually want to make a professional record. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah. That's great. And then in the back of my mind, I'm like, how can I make things more fucked up like they did too? Like finding that balance, like I don't want to just make a pristine sounding rock record. I do want to have some edge, but just trying, because you get different people in the band saying, "Oh, well, this needs to be cleaner." And you get other people saying, "Well, distort the vocals," or distort the drums. And like, okay, well, we got to find the balance.
Exactly. Balance. And then my last question for you, and it's maybe a little bit of a loaded question, but what do you think the best advice you've ever received in relation to your music career has ever been?
Oh, I don't know. Geez, I don't know. I don't know of anyone that has really set me down and said, "Hey, boy, you got to do this one thing," and but I think it's probably just the things that I've learned, of not constantly comparing yourself to other people, and be thankful for what you have and what you've done, and to constantly be learning. I think those things are, if you do those things, then you'll continue to get better, and people will want to work with you.
Cool.
I think.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Well, what I'll do is I will link everything. I'll link Audio Style Studios. I'll link Shadows of Jets, Cut Throat Finches, all of your stuff, how people can get hold of you, etc., etc., etc. Well, Taylor, that's excellent, man. Thank you so much for your time, dude. I'm sure everybody listening will get a tremendous amount from this, and just thank you for your time, man.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you asking me to be a part of this.
Anytime, man. Let's do it again sometime. Thanks,
right
dude.
You're welcome.
Sweet. Another episode done and dusted. I'd like to thank Taylor for his time And if you'd like to touch base with him, please hit the show notes where I've listed all of his information. I'd also like to thank each and every single one of you for your time. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and I truly hope you're getting something from it. That is the goal. If you know somebody who might get something from this, please share it. Don't forget to give us a rating or a review or concerns. You can find out more about us at musicians-mentor.com. My name is Travis. You can find out more about me at travismark.com. Until next time, work hard, play hard, and believe in yourself, because I believe in you, baby. Peace.